this video, we are going to cover scope inheritance in AngularJS. If you are not familiar to scope in AngularJS, I highly recommend you to go through my previous video which covers the basics of scope and how it is related to controller in AngularJS. So let us see what exactly is scope inheritance here. Imagine I have a module and a controller defined in this fashion. And certainly I will also be having a view which will be having a direct link to the modules and the controllers whatever we have created at this stage. So you can see this particular sample is currently directly linked to this module. So let us see how the execution takes place. So the first thing is that we are going to have this particular statement to be executed, which essentially creates a new module. So an instance of a module, and that particular module is currently named as sample. The second statement is something like we are trying to create the definition of the controller here. We are not creating the instance of the controller, we are just creating the definition of the controller. And whenever you are trying to create the controller, you can see we are attaching to the same module called sample, which has been defined earlier. So now you can see the same module is actually having a definition of a new controller called EMP has been created. And the next statement is we are going to have a new controller called EMP details created as part of the same module. The next part is the view itself. So here you can see I have highlighted a particular block of code which is available as part of view. So we already knew what exactly this ng-app does. So the ng-app is essentially nothing but the starting point of our AngularJS application, and currently it is attached to our module called sample. Now this is the most interesting block. So this block, as explained in my previous video, the moment that particular AngularJS parser tries to compile our particular block, it tries to find this particular ng controller directive. It tries to actually compile this directive ng controller, which essentially in this case linked to EMP. So which means this particular block, whenever it is trying to have ng controller to be compiled, this, as it is referring to this controller EMP, that actually creates a new scope instance. So the first thing is that a scope will be created for this whole block. You can see this scope is covering this whole block at the moment. So which means this scope and its boundary and its context is available for this entire block, including the nested attributes or the nested blocks as well. So this scope covers this entire block, including all those particular nested divs or nested blocks we might be having. So the first step is that as we are referring to EMP, even before going to the EMP controller, the first thing it does is actually creation of the scope object itself. Once the scope object has been created, it will be attached to the same div block. As you know, scope will be always sitting at DOM level. So once the scope has been created, it will be associated with the respective DOM element at the browser level itself. And once it got somehow associated with that particular block, then the second step is that it actually creates the instance, a new controller instance gets created, and the same scope object gets associated as part of the controller. So which means now we have a new controller called EMP, as because you are referring to EMP here, we are going to have an instance of that particular controller EMP to be created, and that particular instance essentially internally will have the same scope object whatever is assigned or associated to the same block. So this is the controller instance, and the controller instance will have a direct association to the same scope object where this particular block is really bound to. Now that the controller has direct relation with the scope, the next step is that it actually tries to execute this particular function. So which means this is the initialization function, or it's a definition in this case. So this whole part gets executed after that particular controller has been instantiated. So in this case, the third step, which is nothing but this whole part gets executed. In this in this scenario, all I have is just only one statement, which is nothing but I am trying to create a new property called name for the scope object. So the moment we say it is a new property and a particular value jag to be assigned to this particular scope object, you can see now the scope is currently having a property and a value, which is exactly the way how we have defined here. So that is part of the third step. And once that is over, now you can see the compiler knows that it has to really work and evaluate all those binding expressions whatever we might be providing as part of the same block, and it tries to evaluate this particular expression whatever we have provided based on the scope which has been associated for that particular block. So in this case you can say name, and whenever AngularJS finds this particular evaluation expression, it tries to find this particular property name as part of the same context object, which is nothing but the scope here, and tries to find that particular name here. So as we have name, you can see it tries to get the value jag and directly replaces that particular value once the evaluation has been done. So in that way, you can see once a particular block is made available to AngularJS, it knows that it has to really create a scope object, associate that particular scope object to the block, create a new instance of controller, associate the scope itself to the controller, execute that particular controller code, get all the properties and the values into the scope object, and then evaluate all the expressions against that particular scope object. So this is a simplest life cycle we can say for a particular scope object. And this is a high level overview, by the way. Next, let us see something more interesting. Now we have another block. Now you can see this is a blue block which is nested inside the green block. So the outer block is actually the outer scope right here. And there is something called a new block which is actually referring EMP details. So this blue block is actually nested inside that particular green block. And similarly, you also have that particular block assigned to its own controller. And let us see what happens. Now whenever AngularJS tries to compile this particular blue block, it knows that a new scope object needs to be created. And you can see there is a new scope object created which is nested inside its own outer scope, which is the green one. So you can see the green outer block is associated with the green outer scope. The blue inner block is associated to the blue inner scope, which is available as part of the outer scope. So this is pretty important. So you can have multi-level scopes which may be nested in any number of ways. So to the any number of levels basically. So you can have 3 level, 4 level, or even n level scopes, and all of those particular scopes will be nested accordingly. You can also have siblings of those particular blocks, and you'll also have the siblings of those particular scopes nested in the same fashion. So it is all according to our necessity. So this is the first step of creation of the inner scope. So let us see what's happening next. The next thing is that as this is nested, all those particular properties which are available as part of the outer scope will become available to the inner scope as well. Those are not copied, but instead those are made available in the form of inheritance. So that is what we will be calling it as scope inheritance. So which means whenever an inner scope is created, all the outer scope related information is made available to the inner scope as well. Just like if you are familiar with object-oriented programming, we know that there will be parent class, and if you have a class which is inherited from parent, all those particular members will also be made available as part of the child class or subclass. So similarly, we have an outer scope here. The moment you create an inner scope, it means that all those particular members available in the outer scope are to be made certainly available to the inner scope. So those are automatically made available. Those won't be copied though. Those are just made available. So that is the second step. So once we have the second step completed, which means essentially all those members available in the outer scope are made available to the inner scope as well, then it is associated to that particular DOM element and sits at the DOM element of that inner scope. So which means this scope is really available only within this blue area. If you have nested controllers as part of the blue, all those particular nested blocks will also have this blue scope readily available for them. So that is pretty important. So the outer scope sits at the outer level. However, all those particular properties or the members of the outer scope are also available not only just in the green but also in the blue. But if you define something special in the blue, those are available only within the blue block. Okay, so next step is that you have the inner scope, which essentially tries to create an instance of this controller called EMP details. You can say you are referring to EMP details here. A new instance of EMP details will be created by AngularJS, and then this particular inner scope gets merged to that particular controller. So which means this instance now will have a direct association to the inner scope, which is related to EMP details, nothing but the blue block or say blue scope here. So once that is done, then we know that once it has been instantiated, it has to execute this particular function of that controller, which essentially says that the current scope, which is nothing but the blue scope right here, the scope of this particular controller or the scope which is currently associated with the controller instance, need to have two more properties called salary and department. And you can see these two values for those respective properties are available right here within the same scope object whatever we have created. Now you can see the inner scope has not only got its own members but also all those inherited members from its outer scope. Now that we have all these three members logically, now whenever you bind those particular properties or use evaluation expressions here as part of the blue block, it knows that these evaluation of expressions must be really happening from the blue block. What it does in general is, first of all, imagine it tries to figure out DEPT. Where exactly is DEPT? It goes in here and checks if DEPT is available. Yes, it is available, and then that particular value sales is going to be placed here. Next it goes to salary, and salary is right available here. 3400 will also be replaced here. And next, coming to name. Name is not actually part of this one. It is available as the outer scope. So in general, behind the scenes, what happens is that it tries to find name inside this particular block if you have already assigned. So imagine if you say scope.name equal to something like Scott here, you are going to get a new name called Scott here, which is completely different from what we have already as part of the outer scope. So if the outer scope defines name but the inner scope doesn't define it, then the outer scope related name is the one which will be used by the inner scope. Imagine the outer scope has name and the inner scope has also name, which means you created a new property called name right here. Then the inner scope related property takes precedence. So which means if you define something, a property called name here, that will be overridden by the same property which will be available as part of the outer scope. So which means the child one or the one which is available at the current scope will be taken precedence over the previous one. So if this particular name is found right here in the scope as a local member, that will be given as the first preference. If it is not available, then it goes to the outer scope and tries to see if the outer scope is having the same member. Then if that is available, then that particular value will be brought in here and final will be replaced here. If the outer scope also doesn't have that particular member, then simply it ignores it. No error, no warning. It just simply ignores it if it could not find any information. So in this case, I should not write this particular name equal to jag here. It is just only to make you understand that this name is automatically made available here. So in simplest terms, if the respective property whatever you are using here is not available in the current scope, it switches to its parent scope and see if that is available there. And if it is not even available there, then it just simply ignores it. If it is available in the outer scope, then it will be taken into the consideration. So the top priority is the current scope. If something is not found in the current scope, switch to the parent. If that is also not available, skip to the parent most and parent and parent. So if all of those particular parents do not have that respective member, it just simply ignores. If any of the parents have the member, the most recent one will be taking the precedence. So this is pretty much about the theory on how the scope inheritance is with respect to AngularJS. So only one thing is that if you have outer scope, and if for some reason an inner scope is created, all the members of the outer scope are already automatically made available to the inner scope. So let us jump into a simple example here. So let me duplicate whatever I have here. So let me take this one as 05 and let me clear body and let me clear the scripts whatever I have created here. Okay, so this is a new file, and you can see AngularJS is already made available here. And the first thing I would like to see is a new module with the name sample being created. And next I would like to create a new controller called EMP. And as I mentioned, if you would like to go with a better syntax which is standard across, so you would like to use something like this. So this whole part is already covered as part of my previous video, so you can just check that one if you are unaware of all the syntax, the scope and everything. So now that we have the skeleton of my controller, let us start actually to add members to my particular scope. So in this case I'm just adding jag here. Okay, so I have only one controller at the moment, so let me go to body and let me have div. So as part of the body, the first thing is that I need to have the initialization of my particular Angular application to be made with the module whatever I have created. In this case it is sample, and you can see this is the same sample as whatever I am creating earlier here. So the next thing is that I need to have ng controller to be defined, and that particular ng controller, in this case it is the name called EMP. So I'm just trying to create EMP controller. And now, so let us say I would like to say employee details of name. So let me give some bold to the same expression whatever we are going to do, and let us see if this is working first. So there is no scope inheritance involved here, it is just the parentmost scope, in this case only one controller and only one scope, which will be made available as part of this block. So let me go in here, it is 05.html. So I have my IIS Express running on the same folder, so I can say localhost and I would like to go to 05.html, and now you can see I have my particular name which is actually is highlighted in bold. Okay, so the next thing is that I need to have one more controller to be added so that I can demonstrate the scope inheritance. So I will be having one more controller to be created. So in this case I would like to call this one as EMP details, and then I can say something like scope again, and then function, and this is also going to be a scope. And once I have this, now I can add more properties to this particular controller EMP details, and in this case I would like to say salary equal to 3400, and now I can say scope.department number equal to sales. So let us see how well this one works. Okay, I need to add the nested block here, so I would like to say one more div is needed here with ng controller equal to EMP details. So this is the new controller I would like to add, and as part of this one I would like to say something like name, let me put this one under strong, earns, and I would like to use the same salary whatever I have provided here, and then and works in whatever the department I provided here. So let me put DPT, and let me use the same DPT here. So this is just some description. So now you can see I'm actually having a new block which is referring to EMP details, and this particular new block is actually a nested block to the outermost controller called EMP. So let us see if everything works well. So I go in here and refresh. Okay, so except DEPT everything worked. So you can see I have the name which has been inherited, I have the salary, but DEPT for some reason it is missing. So where is DEPT thing? Okay, all I really missed is one more brace. So let me do this. Now I have sales department right here. So you can see even though this particular name is not available in EMP details, you can see in EMP details I do not have name, but still name is being evaluated, as because if name is not available here, then it goes to the parent controller called EMP, which is nothing but this EMP, and figures out that there exists a name. So let me get that particular name in here. So in that way I have the scope inheritance to be implemented. We can extend this one further, probably by adding one more controller called something like this. I would like to have a new controller to be added, and I would like to call this one as employee paycheck, and a new scope created for this one, and this is going to be again the same syntax as we did earlier. I am going to have the scope, so I have my particular skeleton for this controller as well, and as part of this controller I would like to have two methods to be added to the scope. So I would like to say get access. So I would like to make this function as simple as possible just for our understanding, and as part of this taxes I would like to use the salary which is already available in my previous one. So which means in my opinion I would like to use EMP paycheck as a nested scope inside EMP details. Now I will have access to salary, department, and also name as part of this particular scope. So this is going to be a third level nested. So which means this is the first level, this is the second level, and this is going to be the third level nesting. Sorry, this is second level nesting. So if this is parent, this is first level nesting, and this is second level nesting. So I am going to say something like return $scope.salary into 30 by 100. So it is something like a vague calculation of 30% of the existing salary. So you can see this salary will be actually used by its parent scope. So if the parent scope doesn't have the salary, then this is going to throw an error. If the parent has got the salary, then it will be calculated accordingly. So similarly, I am going to see one more scope method called something like getNet. So in this case, I would like to say something like salary minus $scope.getTaxes. So you can see this is the function, or say this is the method which actually tries to get the salary first from here and then use this particular get taxes. So we are actually deducting the taxes from existing salary and finally return the same, which becomes getNet. So let us see on how I can get the same thing here, and you can see this needs to be part of the parent container or parent controller called EMP details. So you can see I have the ng controller EMP details, and right inside that I'm going to start with another div. So in this case again I'm going to say controller equal to EMP paycheck. So this is important. Now you can see this ng controller is made available inside its parent called EMP details. So as EMP details at the top has salary and department, the same salary and department are also made available to EMP paycheck. And you can see now EMP paycheck has got access to salary and department and also name if really it is necessary. I am not using department and name here, but you still have access to both of those, as because this is nested inside this, which has all the members name, salary and department indirectly. Next, as part of this controller, now I can say taxes, and now I would like to have get taxes method to be executed, and I would like to have a BR tag, and at the same time I would like to have some net to be calculated. So let us see if this is working, and I refresh it, and now you can see out of 3,400, taxes alone will go around 1020, and finally we have net as 2380. So this is pretty much about the scope inheritance of AngularJS. In my next video, we are going to cover a bit more about scope inheritance, which includes root scope and so on. There's one more important thing I forgot to explain here. If you go back here, let us see how the scope inheritance can be visualized as part of your console. So if you open your F12 and let us go to the elements first and check that you are at the level of EMP, so which means you are at the outermost scope. So now the moment I say $0, as I mentioned, you are actually at EMP level, which means at the parentmost level. So you can see we have child and also we have a nested child. So this is the first level EMP, second level EMP details, and further nested EMP paycheck. Now you are available at EMP. And now let us check what are all the parts you have in here. Angular.element$0.scope. So if you open this, you can see ID, currently the scope ID of this particular EMP. So which means the scope object associated for the outermost one has an ID of 2. This is pretty important to understand right now. And it has got only one property called name, which is currently assigned to Jag. So let me clear everything here. And now let us go to the nested one, which is EMP details. And now I execute the same thing, which is $0. Currently $0 is associated to this one, which whatever is highlighted becomes $0. So again, once I say this, let us open this. Now you can see there is a change here. Instead of ID 2, I am seeing ID 3 because this is a new scope object and it has got its own ID. So the earlier one was actually 2. And the current one is actually made with ID 3, and now it has got two properties called DEPT and salary, but you can see it doesn't have Jag or name property anywhere because it is inherited from underscore underscore prototype object. So if you are not familiar to JavaScript prototypes, you might want to have a quick read up on that one. So this is part of JavaScript prototype object, and the moment you open it, you can see currently this object, which is nothing but ID 3, the scope object, is inheriting from the parent, which is nothing but the prototype object in this case, and you have name. So this name is automatically made available along with DEPT and also the salary. And the parent object, you can see, has got ID 2 and the current object has got ID 3. So let me clear everything and now go to EMP paycheck. So let me execute the same statement again. And now you can see the latest one, which has got ID 4. It doesn't have any properties. However, it has got two methods, getNet and getTaxes. This ID 4 is actually inheriting from a prototype object from ID 3, which is nothing but the one which has got two properties called DEPT and salary. And further, this particular proto object, that is the parent object, is further inheriting from its own parent, and the ID value of that one is 3, which is having name. So essentially this property name and the properties DEPT and salary are also made available to the final most object, that is EMP paycheck related scope object. So all those three properties along with these two methods are made available as part of ID 4. So hopefully we understood completely about scope inheritance, and in my next video, as I mentioned, we are going to cover root scope and so on.